Hi, I'm Kellie Carter from Give Black Alliance, whose mission is to inform, reform, and transform philanthropy in our communities, our Black communities. Give Black Alliance is trying something new. We're trying a podcast, Black Tea. This podcast is about relaxing, reflection, and reinventing ourselves and reinvesting ourselves in our communities. You may have seen our couch conversations where they were a little more buttoned up, where we talked very politely, very nicely. This is going to be a little different. We decided, particularly in this environment, we needed to have another space, another place that we can come together more often to just be with us, to talk to each other, talk to the resources of our community, our Black intellects, our neighbors, our friends, our families, all of the resources that we have around us, and to really just kind of be ourselves. So join us every third Thursday. We'll be here waiting for you. It's a place where you can have a drink, take some notes, or just come together, where we hope we can just understand each other a little bit better, support each other a little bit better, and be here with each other. This is for us, our people, all our people here at Black Tea. Welcome, everyone. Hello. We're so delighted you're here. We're so pleased to have this conversation today with you. We are just delighted to kick off our podcast. Give Black Alliance seeks to inform, reform, and transform the conversation of philanthropy in our Black communities. We've been doing this through programs, through the couch conversation, which has welcomed many, many, many Black intellectuals for many years. But now we're going to move from the couch to a podcast and moving this conversation from the couch to in person. So invite us to your city. Today, we are going to start with our first podcast, Black Tea. It's powered by Give Black Alliance, where we're serious about the business of being Black and want to be strategic about how we build our assets. Our tea is our power, our ability to inform, reform, and transform our community. Most importantly, this would not happen without you, so thank you for joining us. Today's episode, a retrospective in Blackness, looking at the period of 1926 to today. We're excited to start our podcast honoring the father of Black History Month. 100 years ago, Dr. Carter G. Woodson had the audacity to start a movement that we are a part of today. He launched Negro History Week to preserve, protect the truth about us, our Black life in America, and insisting that our history be studied, honored, and told by us. This inaugural episode of Black Tea, we are going to move from private reflection to public dialogue as our brilliant intellectuals will join us to unpack what a century of intentional Black study has produced and how we understand this legacy today in that movement that we are a part of. What history demands of our future, we are going to use this time for reflection, reclamation, and strategy. Welcome to Black Tea, where we reflect and we become intentional. So today we have Dr. Kellie Carter Jackson, the amazing, beautiful, brilliant Michael Denise Keller, 68 Associate Professor of Department of Africana Studies at Wellesley College. Dr. Carter Jackson is also the author of the book, We Refuse, A Forceful History of Black Resistance. Thank you for joining us.
Hi.
We next have Dr. Brian Kwoba, a dazzling, handsome, audacious associate professor, director of African and African American Studies at the University of Memphis. Dr. Kwoba is also the author of Hubert Harrison, Forbidden Genius of Black Radicalism. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Bataya.
And we have next Dr. Shelley Viola Murphy, a fantastical, alluring, ever-inspiring, our family sage, who is part of the Descendant Project researcher at the University of Virginia and founding member and current president of Afro America Historical Genealogy Society chapter of Central Virginia. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
And we have also our handsome, ingenious, the maestro, the Dean of Africana Studies at Berklee College of Music, Reverend Dr. Price, author of the book Hip Hop Culture and also the founding founder of Community Love Christian Fellowship. Welcome. So, he's here. We're going to begin this conversation. And this is really a conversation for us and about us. And, I'm so delighted to have each and every one of you to just help unpack where we are today. One of the things that Dr. Woodson said, we must give our own story to the world. So, Dr. Shelley, you being a genealogist, I have to start with you. What does that mean? Like, as you think about the work that you've done, your podcast, your emotional grounding, what does that mean?
What does it mean as far as a genealogist?
That's
well,
right.
I believe you mentioned already about recovery, reclamation, but I also want to say reorientation and self-knowledge. And I say that because as a genealogist, we're giving voice to those that have been silenced. We're finding our family and we're finding our roots. And I think that acknowledgement and the self-acknowledgement is what is really meaningful, coming from us now having control and taking control of our stories. And I think that's what Dr. Woodson basically was after, not an orientation, but after us having control of our own narratives. And now that genealogy is doing it. And it's a force to be reckoned with right now, because America doesn't like itself that very much. So these stories are coming out, family stories, individuals' names, and so forth. So that's
I appreciate that. I really do appreciate that. I'm going to call you Dr. Brian because all of you are now my new friends. It's true. And we're going to get into it. It's not just me asking the questions, but we're going to ask the questions of each other too. So when you think about this moment, what comes to mind, especially in reference to your book and the other work that you're doing?
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me, by the way. One of the things that comes to mind is the times that we're living in, right? In which it feels like the very idea of Black history memorialization is under attack. Not only at a national level with, the Trump administration's efforts to take down monuments to slavery and revise national parks and government websites that deal with Black history. But also for me, being based in Memphis, Tennessee, like many red states, it's another factor that is compounded because the Tennessee state legislature has passed legislation banning DEI in public institutions. And so being at a public institution, we're facing, local attacks of that kind as well. And so I think, to me, it speaks to the importance of spaces like this, right? Because no matter what they're doing policy-wise in terms of government, they can't stop us from convening, coming together, grounding and communing to discuss and learn about Black history, to reflect on it, to do all the things that we're here to do today. And so my book, to speak to the other part of your question, is really an offering and a sort of reclamation of Black history that has been almost lost, if not erased entirely from most people's awareness. Hubert Harrison is one of the great sort of trailblazers in the Black radical tradition, influencing people like Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, A. Philip Randolph. But he was more radical than them, basically. And so Harrison was written out of the history, which is why most people have never heard of him. And which is why I wrote this book, because he's someone who had an extraordinary influence, not only in his time, but whose ideas remain painfully relevant to the modern world.
These stories are important. And what you said made me really think about, Kellie, your book. And I love it, with the woman with the gun. Like telling our story in a different way. You might have to listen. So, right?
Thank you.
So, Kellie, like, you know, Dr. Brian brought up a really good point. You know, you're at a university as well. These things are happening public, private, everywhere. So, how do we continue this movement of our stories?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think about this all the time. I think about the fact that we are in a period of severe white backlash and retrenchment. A lot of the progress that has been made is being undone. And while I think Carter G. Woodson could look at this moment and be like, wow, a century later, and we're still celebrating Black History Month, and it's no longer, a week, it's a month. There's progress for sure. But that progress has to be continually and consistently fought for and persevere, and we can't just sort of rest on our laurels. And I do think in some ways, depending on the administration, we've gotten a little too comfortable thinking that these ideas and this work and this history won't, will last forever and won't go away. But the pushback is always there, and the pushback is relentless. And so we kind of have to match that energy and actually exceed that energy when it comes to how we present African American history. So in my college, I'm trying to do that in my classroom. I'm trying to do that with the books I write. I'm trying to do that with, the podcast that I'm on, constantly letting people know that this work requires constant activism.
And what is your podcast?
The name of our podcast, the long name is This Day in Esoteric Political History, which is kind of a joke. Name, we call it This Day for short. And we're looking at America 250 and looking at 50 weeks that have shaped the nation, and really trying to dive into this history as well and let people know that it matters.
Right. As I was thinking about what you were saying, one of the things that we're not talking about is actually the church, right? And where does the church come into this? And Dr. Price, Reverend Dr. Price, help us really think through this church part, because it's a really important part that we don't hear a lot about. We hear about the past church, but not where we are today.
Well, the church has always been an influential piece of the narrative. One of Dr. Carter G. Woodson's most important books that he wrote was a book on the history of the Negro Church in 1922. And it was one of the first historical representations of what we call what was called the invisible institution, right? Because the church, because people thought about it in the ways that they did, as an ecclesial body, as a worshiping body, people didn't see it as an organizing body and as a philanthropic body, right? As a body that actually raised money, raised social needs, raised concerns, and provided for the people, which goes back to the first century church with Jesus Christ. And so when that part is brought back into fold, we actually understand what Carter G. Woodson was doing. I mean, here's a brilliant man who's a second PhD recipient from Harvard, history, and who started his own association because when he graduated from Harvard, was kicked out. He was not invited into the association for historians, and so he started his own, right, the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. And you have this marvelous story of him interacting with Hubert Harrison, and him interacting with W.B. Du Bois, and him interacting with Marcus Mosiah Garvey. I mean, he used to write for Garvey in the Negro World. So, I mean, all of these things are interconnected. And the other piece that I'll say is that Carter G. Woodson did his part. Those kids at Kent State in 1968 who protested, and they were the ones who moved us from Negro History Week going back to 1926 to Black History Month in 1970. It was those college students who protested, right? We have to continue to do our part.
Well, I appreciate that shout out because I am from Ohio. So I appreciate that as well. But what you said, I like, we have to put this quote up here, but we have another quote for him that I really want to get into as we think about the state of where we are. And you kind of led us to the 70s, but I want to go to where we are. If a race has no history, if it has no worthwhile traditions, it becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world and where it stands in danger of being exterminated. So, Emmett, what do you think about that? And I would like you to also kind of, with Dr. Brian, help bring that to fruition.
Well, I mean, this is one of many brilliant statements that Dr. Woodson made. And there's a brother who is a contemporary of his, who we know is Arnold Alfonso Schoenberg, right? And Dr. Schoenberg called himself a Afro-Boricua historian. He was Puerto Rican of African and German descent, and he refused to operate from a position of not owning all of his intersectional ethnic identities. And so, as a Puerto Rican with African descent and German descent, he made sure that his racial history always was on the forefront so that we could know that he was wrestling with all those things. Carter G. Woodson was very similar. Brother was from Canton, Virginia. And unlike Du Bois, right? Unlike Du Bois, he was from the South, who had some folks who were dealing with that Southern plantation situation, whereas Du Bois was from up here in Massachusetts, Greater Barrington, right? And so that was part of the rift between Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was from the South. And so, in that sense, what am I getting at? I'm getting at the tension of the varying narratives and varying experiences of Black peoples. And so, even into today, we have a multitude of experiences, a multitude of expressions, a multitude of dynamics and lenses through which we look at. And so, trying to morph into a homogenous and monolithic lens and think that all Black people should think alike, do alike, and say alike, and be alike is a misnomer. We've never had that, right? I mean, go back to Malcolm and Martin. So the challenge of today is, where do we find those common denominators? And where do we take those historical journeys and show that even though they were different approaches, they were still one vision, which was liberation of all Black people.
So I like that, but here we are, right? We're 100 years from this story. How can we take that and make it private? You know, Dr. Shelley, with the work that you're doing, I think one of the things that I think about, those people knew their people. They knew from to some degree where they came from. I'm not so sure we know that today.
We absolutely do not. And again, I go back to the people thinking of Dr. Woodson. I still say he was trying to get that point across about controlling our knowledge. And this is what's been lost so much. But I have to give credit to Alex Haley for kicking a boost in 77, that now people, we had oral history all the time, but we didn't share it outside of the realms of where we heard it, be on the porch, be on, in the house, or whatever it is. And I think now more than ever, because of technology and everything, we have that opportunity to not just think about the month of February. And thank you to Dr. Woodson for the week, and now we have a month, but it's 365 days, and we have to reflect back on what we know, what we hear, and what we experience. And I think it's now our time to tell those stories. So the call to action is, do your family history, tell the stories, regardless of who doesn't like it and who doesn't want to hear it. Tell the stories, because you got generations to pass it down. You mentioned about earlier, there's a whole segment of the Revolutionary War that people are just now coming out. We are pushing about the Black patriots that served. We're pushing even about the Black loyalists that were with the British side. These are stories that are not told. Well, they're coming, and they're coming out now. And I appreciate the opportunity being involved in a lot of that. So again, call to action is to start doing your history and honoring Dr. Woodson for what he has started, and hopefully we can keep that grounded. And I'm with the university as well, commenting back. And so, yeah, it was under threat. It's still under threat right now.
I appreciate you bringing that up, and appreciating you thinking about the threat, but exactly what we can do in this moment with the threat, which made me think about, Kellie, you know, your book starts with your story, right?
Yeah.
Your family story. And I don't know if you know this, Dr. Shelley. I'm gonna let her tell her story, but I just love that part of your book that starts so personal, so much a part of this is me, right?
Yeah. I really wanted to do something different in my next book, which was put more of myself in it. I think a lot of scholars are dissuaded from doing that work. We're told to be objective. We're told not to talk about ourselves. And I push back on that narrative because I think nothing is objective. We all sort of bring ourselves to the table. We bring our full selves when we write our stories. But also I don't know, in like a shameless plug, was thinking of the film Coco, like you never die until the last person says your name. And so by putting my ancestors and my grandparents and even my siblings into my text, I get to keep their name alive, which is really powerful. But I open up the book of We Refuse talking about my great-grandmother Ernesto, who when she was 9 years old, she stepped on a rusty nail and it got really infected and she was at death's door. And her mother brought her to the only doctor she knew, which was this white man who lived in the other side of town in a big house. And he, offered to help my great-grandmother, but on one condition. And that was that if he healed her, she had to come and live with his family and work for his family for the rest of her life. She's 9 years old. It's 1915 in rural Alabama. Slavery has been over for 50 years. And yet this is the proposal that he's offering in exchange for giving her care. And it was my great-great-great-grandmother, Martha, who refused this doctor's proposal, who picks up Ernesta, takes her home, administers every natural remedy that she can find in her garden, in her cupboard, and she saves Ernesta's life. And I open with that story because refusal is so powerful. We do not have to make these terrible, unconscionable choices of choosing between death or a life in slavery or a life in servitude. And I want us to all sort of channel that refusal as well, to say, these options, we're not limited by these options. This binary is way too narrow to encompass all the things that we can do to push back on white supremacy. And so I think about that story a lot. I think about my great-great-great-great-grandmother's refusal and how I can manifest those same ideas today.
Yeah, and that refusal is part of that being a genius. And betray us, right? And I love the fact that you shifted so we could see that book, because we need to see that book. But that's part of the story, right?
Part of the story.
The other part, but let's talk about this radical genius that Carter G not only started, but continues through us, right? Dr. Brett.
Yeah, well, I actually, it's funny because some of us take a while to get there. I appreciate, the point about sharing our story, because one of the things that I mentioned in my book in the preface is that I actually never liked history. I thought it was just.
Say more now.
I know.
Say that.
I know it sounds strange for a history professor to say that, but no, I actually never had a teacher who made it interesting. I always thought of history as just boring memorization of names and dates. And something that was dead and in the past, and there's nothing you can do about it. Then when I was an undergrad, my senior year of undergrad at Cornell University, I took this trip to Cuba, and it raised all these political and historical questions that I couldn't answer. And I became very active in, at that time, the anti-war movement against the Iraq War during the George W. Bush years. Yeah. It's funny how Bush seems mild nowadays,
right?
But the point being that is the moment when I started doing activism, to change the world. That's the moment when I started to realize that history matters, because if you want to change the world, it's useful to know how it got to be the way it is, right? And history is such a useful way of understanding how we got the world that we have. And so, I share that because I think it's so critical that we foster this understanding, right? I mean, I'm looking at the quote from Woodson, and I was reminded of another quote, which Malcolm X used to say: if you've never done anything, you'll never do anything, right? In other words, if we don't know the greatness of our past, right, the immediate past, our ancestors, but also the greatness of ancient African civilizations, If we don't know anything about that, we will never aspire to greatness in the future or think of ourselves as capable, right, of having that sense of possibility for the freedom dreams that that we all have. And so yeah, I think that part of how they keep us ignorant or keep us in a particular place is by either denying us our history or distorting it and whitewashing it in such a way so that we don't have access to the kind of Black genius that precedes us, which is part of why I subtitled my book Forbidden Genius of Black Radicalism, because there's a way in which the genius of Black communities in a collective sense has been forbidden oftentimes, right? Even figures that we think we know, like Dr. King, for example, or a Rosa Parks, right? Or so many others, they get reduced to like one moment. In the case of King, it's the March on Washington, I Have a Dream speech. In the case of Rosa Parks, it's, this moment on a bus where she's refusing, to give up her seat. When these folks lived long lives and evolved and became oftentimes much more radical in their thinking, much more forward thinking and visionary from the individual slices in time that they get reduced to. So I think we have to really honor the fullness of who we are in our past and in our history, so that we can truly lean in and live into our potential in the future.
Now, I'm going to keep this quote up here because everyone's being super polite. The question is, are we doing it? What has 100 years produced? And I see the head shaking slowly, fast. What's going on?
So
why?
So part of it, Cornel West said this a while ago, that if it was not for Black music, we would all have suffocated by the toxicity of white supremacy. And Black music has been a detox for us. The challenge is that we don't necessarily understand all the cultural codes in the Black music. So my dear sister invoked Alex Haley, who in the mid 70s, did the research and took us back to the continent of Africa. One of the ways that he did that was by seeking out a griot by the name of Papa Suso, who was from the Gambia people. A dear colleague of mine taught at Brown University for many years. And Papa Suso, as a griot, retained the repertoire of his people. Every time somebody was born, every time somebody died, every time somebody was wedded, every time there was a tsunami, a storm, a famine, there was a song that was created. And he retained generations of songs, such that when Alex Haley asked about, Chicken George or Aunt Kizzy, then Papa Suso can retell that song, right? And so my dear brother Brian, Dr. Brian, talks about his earlier years of not necessarily liking history. Well, most of us don't like history because it's not ours. When Mama and them is in the kitchen talking about all the peoples, right? We call it, the grapevine or being messy or whatever. We like that kind of history, but we don't like hearing about Vespucci or Columbus or hearing about all these other folks who were colonizers and hearing from a positionality of who was colonized and how bad it was. We like to hear about the greatness of our people and whatnot, right? So we have a responsibility to re-narrate the white supremacist narratives that have been told. And we can, just as things are being whitewashed, we can blackwash them back, right? Because the original story is still the original story. The cradle of humanity is on the continent of Africa. In the first century of the Christian church, there were more Christians on the continent of Africa and the continent of Asia than there were in Europe, right? The Vatican didn't even exist at that time. So the reality is, and Big Mama used to say this, once you know better, you do better, right?
That's right.
We got to know better.
That's right.
Can I jump in here and say that,
you better jump in here.
I also think we have given away too many mics. Too many people got a mic that shouldn't have it. When I think about the presence of social media and Instagram and TikTok, there are a lot of people that are creating these historical reels, that are doing these, either Black history sort of factoids. But we have sort of boxed out the intellectuals in some way, the people whose very lane it is to do this work. And now we hear from people that are not versed in the history, that are not, sort of properly educated or well read, and they're talking nonsense, and they have a platform and they have a mic, and people are listening because they're entertaining or because they're silly or because they're salacious. And I think that's a real disservice. And in some ways, we have to get back to the very people who have been trying to curate this work and have been trying to get a platform, trying to get voice and volume. We don't give them as much credit as they deserve. And I'd like to see a return to that more. Like, there are a lot of scholars that know how to do this work and do it in ways that are vibrant and rich and activating. And we have either silenced them or refused to platform or support them. And I think that's a real tragedy. Not everybody deserves a mic.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. We're still debating, why did they, whoever they is, gave us the shortest month in the year?
I'm taking all the months.
I mean,
That's my new thing.
But
I'm
this
taking
is
all the months.
But this is the thing, right?
365 days, no months.
No,
But this is the thing. There was no they that
That's
gave it to us. Dr. Woodson picked this particular week because of how we used to think about Abraham Lincoln, right? And of course, how we still think about Frederick Douglass. Now, the joke of it is, no one's asking the question about how do we now think about Abraham Lincoln.
Preach.
Right?
All right.
So,
that's a whole nother discussion, and we don't have time for it.
Maybe we need to have another discussion, right? Because we know he did not see us as equal. We know that he was sending us back to Liberia.
You got 250 years of them not seeing us equal.
See? So, yeah.
but to your point, I want to go back to what Dr. Kellie's saying. We got a lot of mics, and half of them ain't telling the truth because they don't know the history and they're reimagining something. So what does this mean for this moment? Like, Dr. Bryant, you got interested. What should we be doing? What should we consider, like, right now? Because it's becoming critical. AI is picking up on this and now spewing out lies.
And running with it.
Yes. Where's this legacy? Where do we go?
Sorry, I was muted. I mean, that's a great question. I think that the role of social media is very contradictory, right? On the one hand, there's great potential to reach new audiences and to reach beyond, our locales. I mean, Hubert Harrison, who I write about in my book, was famous for speaking on street corners to audiences large enough to block traffic on a whole range of different subjects. Right, because he had a kind of genius level intellect and all this knowledge that he would just share with the people, what many Harlem residents called the outdoor university. I think that's a really interesting model because it sort of speaks to a more grassroots, sort of working class orientation that is free of the confines of a formal institution per se. Right, it's an outdoors kind of African call and response, an oral tradition, right? There's the role of the griot that we can think about in this context. In my book, I talk about the outdoor grioversity. And now, so social media has a potential for that, right? Anybody can make something that can reach not just people on a street corner, but like anyone in the world who's tuned into that channel or that page. On the other hand, of course, it also facilitates the spread of misinformation, disinformation, distortions, whitewashed narratives, and all the rest of it. And so I think it's a double-edged sword in that sense, and it requires people to really develop a kind of media literacy, right, and a critical thinking towards all the content that we encounter, right, no matter where it's coming from. Yeah.
And I wrote a comment and following up with what Dr. Jackson said. And again, I can put my scholarly hat on or the genealogist hat, but I'm just gonna say.
Well, you're just gonna put on your sage hat.
I'm gonna put. I got my crown on.
Put your crown on. Put your sage
crown on. But what I want to say is, we've lost so much, and we're still fighting. And I think everybody is saying now we've got more avenues to make this, to preserve it. I'm going to say that. But there's so many stories that are twisted. And actually those stories also bring out chaos. And so what I'm saying is to start at home. Dr. Jackson started with herself. That's how we start. What did you hear? What do you know? And go forward. And there's nothing wrong with people saying, little Jimmy, who's your great grandmother? Who's your great granddaddy? And start talking and communicating. Because if we don't build, we're still falling and we're still fighting, and we're fighting the same narrative 250 years, kicking. And I'm going with America 250 because I think it comes back to us. You don't have to have degrees or titles. You don't have to have the mic. It's got to be at that community level, I think, to bring in those stories, because everybody else knows those stories, but they're not telling it. So in other words, there's almost people saying you're silent, just like they say, oh, Black folks can't find their people prior to 1870. They can't find them. Well, that is the biggest lie that I done heard in my 40 plus years. That's another topic. But again, that's what got instilled with hundreds and thousands of people, white and Black, that you can't find nothing about your ancestors prior to 1870. I can give you one collection that's 3.7 million with names.
All right.
Before
Got the receipts.
1870. Yeah.
So nobody complain. You
Can't
got the receipt.
unless you ask.
That's right.
And start digging. So I'm saying start at the community level. We have to. Everybody is saying what we need to do, and now we're saying it's time.
It is time.
And do it at the community level. Don't think about what's up on the sky and what you hear somebody on Tuesday night or whatever it is. Do your own and use that mic, in your platform to tell that story. So anyway, that's my only input, and I'm hoping that we can keep this going, that we encourage and motivate people to tell their story, their family story, because it includes the good, the bad, and the ugly, but it's our story.
It is our story. And if we don't tell our story, people start interpreting.
No, other people will tell it.
They will tell it and tell it wrong.
Correct.
And one of the things that I realized this week, especially, and even with Dr. Carter G, I don't know if you all saw the story. I'm gonna get a little controversial. A little story that came out earlier this month, and it was around one of my favorite quotes. So my quote is, and I'm gonna have Sean bring it up. When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. And he didn't say it. You do not have to tell him to stand here or go yonder. He will find his proper place and will stay in it. You do not need to send him to the back door. He'll go without being told. In fact, if there is no back door, he will cut one for his special benefit. His education makes it necessary.
That's the history.
Now it gets twisted because there's a little controversy about this, right? That we learned earlier this month. And I think we got a clip to show how people, if we don't know and we're not stewards of our history, how other people will take it. So, Sean, do you have the clip?
I've been receiving speech services since first grade. I attend Mr. Goldman and 2 other students on Fridays. He delivers lessons and helps us fit those skills into our lessons.
What was that like? They're too dumb to know they're in a bad school. I mean, apparently Martin Luther King said it. Like, if you train a Black person well enough, they'll know to use the back. You don't have to tell them anymore. They're just
Friedman, what you're saying is absolutely hearable here. You've got to stop.
So let's take that away. She called herself, yes, she did, quoting Dr. Woodson, and it was taken out of context. I apologize. Here we are in Black History Month, and this happened during Black History Month, 100 years. She's a professor of biology at Hunter.
I know a little bit about that.
And here we are in Black History Month. We have this story. This is us. Yet, this is how our work is being bastardized, our genius not credible, and using it to say that our kids are dumb because we don't know. So, Dr. Kellie, you know I got to go to you. And then I'm going to go to Dr. Shelley, or either maybe I don't even have to go. What comes to mind when you see this in Black History Month?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think let me say
years.
My mother is a retired professor of education, and one of the things she taught me when I was in high school was the deficit model. And I was like, what's the deficit model? And she said to me, she asked me a question. She said, do you believe that all children can learn? I said, yeah. She said, not everybody believes that. So if you don't believe that all children can learn, then you are starting from a deficit model, meaning some kids will make it, some kids won't make it. And everything that you do will be filtered through that lens of who you think is expendable or disposable and who you think has a chance or has promise or purpose or what have you. And you see that a lot in the field of education, where people are doling out everything from this deficit model. Black children are the problem. Black children need to be in special ed. Black children can't sit still. Black children can't learn. Black children aren't gifted or talented. I mean, this is the status quo of education, especially American education, where you have legions of white teachers oftentimes teaching African American children at disproportional rates. I mean, one of the things we lost with Brown v. Board of Education was Black educators, Black teachers, Black principals, Black superintendents. Black people ran and curated their own educational systems. Carter G. Woodson is a part of that. He was fortifying Black teachers. He was creating Black textbooks to give to Black teachers, and vice versa. Black teachers were saying, here's the textbook I made. You might want to use it. Here's the handbook I made, in Chicago. You might want to use it. Like, we don't have that sort of network anymore. We certainly don't have those numbers anymore in terms of who's teaching our children. And it shows. And it absolutely shows. And here's the thing. The deficit model is something that can be parroted by white teachers, but it can also be parroted by Black teachers as well. You see, if you've ever seen the movie Lean on Me, that classic movie, I look back at that movie and I cringe. It's terrible. The way that they were operating with how Black children were just like expendable, so yeah, that is the deficit model in practice.
And to be honest, that meeting was at the Community Education Council for Schools District 3 webinar.
So I have a question.
Yes.
And I'm questioning the other panelists here. We saw that quote. We also saw a little bit of the tape. So, you know what I do?
Mm-hmm.
My expertise is actually slave era. So that power in that control, I have to say that's also fear. And I'm saying that back to what Dr. Jackson just said, Woodson's quote, because they're controlling the narrative. But I also think that's the biggest fear of these children, that you keep telling them they can't learn, they won't learn. And so forth. That is the fear, because they know there's more to, I'm going to say, us or people of color and so forth. And I shared with Ms. Carter earlier today, one of the greatest things, and I'll go back to this because I don't want to leave, because I know it has to keep going on, is one of the biggest things so far in my career doing this genealogy research was seeing a couple and their 2 kids at the memorial to enslaved laborers at the University of Virginia. And they were pointing to the ancestors on the wall to those little boys. And I think they were like 9 and 7. That made me tear up because that's exactly why we do. I had retired, but this is exactly why we're doing that. But if we keep getting told that we can't or we don't, we're not willing, there's still thousands and thousands of us that believe that and walk that talk. So how do we fix that? Because they have the fear of us taking over, a day of reckoning or something. I don't know, but I know their power is their fear, and it shouldn't be our fear as well.
I think that's the visionary question. How do we fix it?
Yeah. And maybe it's not fixing it. Maybe it's reverse it. Yes. Reversing
How we start to reverse this thing.
Yeah. So, I'm stuck.
Well, let's unstuck ourselves here, because where we put our time and energy becomes what we see as a priority. And the more time and energy we give, quote unquote, them, the more we prioritize them, their thinking, and we become respondents to their initial whatever. So I think one of the things that we have to do is reframe our priorities. And if our priorities is us, our young people, our elders, our genealogies, then we got to think about how do we convince folks to get beyond, the pricking of the blood, and then my DNA is going to be in some place, and then I'm going to get hacked and then co-opted. Like, we got to put our time and attention into those things, right? Because the work down in Montgomery, Brian Stevenson, the work all over the nation that's going on is giving us a blueprint for the fact that there is a there. And if we can redirect all of our attention to the there, then we have a reality. What Carter G. Woodson was doing, what Hubert Harrison was doing, what Du Bois was doing, what Schoenberg was doing, and all the greats were doing at that time, including all of the sisters that I just did not name, right? What they were doing was in the wake of lynching and the height of lynching, right? So there was an absolute urgency to figure out how to take experiments. And they tried to create societies, they tried to create journals, they tried to create, neighborhoods, they tried to create all these experiments. And for some reason, we've lost the sense of experimentation because of our desire to assimilate into a white nomenclature of what success is, right? So that white supremacist ideology teaches us that we need to go to this school versus that school, live in this neighborhood versus that neighborhood, believe it or not, go to this church versus that church, right? And so we need to disavail ourselves from that prioritization of this and move back to the route that we were on.
And part of that route was our philanthropy. And Absolutely. It's not just money, how we spent our time, right? Like, where did we volunteer? Where do we give our talent? Who ran our churches? Who ran our schools? How do we give, and this is the thing, right? Our social capital. Who are we vouching for? How do I say, I know you, I see you, right? And then I advocate for you. So if we think about the next 50 years, right? 150 years of Carter G, what do you want to see? What do you expect to see?
Well, I want to see us not iconize the great this, the great that. I want us to get back to community, because the power is in the community. So when I get back to what Dr. Shelley was saying earlier, you need to tell your story and start in the local community. Like, that's what I want to see, right? I don't want to see the great Malcolm X versus the great Martin Luther King Jr. or the great W.E.B. Du Bois versus the great Booker T. Washington. And I'm purposely doing this, and I'm going to call myself out on it. Notice how I keep calling the great men, and I don't mention the women. I do that on purpose, just to make an example of how we need to disavow ourselves of this white supremacist ideology that we have. So if we can get back to the community, which is in Black communities, which is usually ran by the women, ran by the sisters, ran by the mothers and the grandmamas and all of them. If we can be honest about that, And then speaking of honesty, if we can tell our story and acknowledge that we all got an extra sibling somewhere and that Papa was a Rolling Stone and Mama had whatever, right? If we can actually be honest about that stuff and not be shamed and ashamed and embarrassed about that, right? Then we can actually wrestle with the things that we need to wrestle with and actually come together and say, you know what? You're not so different than I am. Matter of fact, we're probably kinfolk, right? And so we can build that. So I think that's extremely important for the season ahead.
I do. Dr. Kellie.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Dr. Price anymore. I mean, there's a reason I titled my book We Refuse and not I Refuse. And part of that is because I'm trying to get people to come back to the collective, to think of what does it mean for us to have consensus, for us to be in solidarity, not just with our Black brothers and sisters either, because we are all getting our clocks cleaned by the white man. Like we have seen in this past month, how expendable white people are, like how expendable our Latino brothers and sisters are, our Native brothers and sisters are. Like we all need collective action. We all need solidarity. I firmly believe that solidarity is our greatest weapon against white supremacy, because white supremacy functions off division. It functions off hierarchy. It functions off the individual pushing down the rest of the group. And so when we get collective action, that's what excites me more than anything. When I see movements that don't have leaders, I am more excited than I have ever been, because leaders can be assassinated, leaders can be taken out. But when you talk about the movement, the people, you know, this grassroots activism, that's a lot harder to scatter than a person.
Dr.
If I can build on that.
Yes, please do, Dr. Brian.
Yeah, because actually I was going to make a similar point. I think that part of what happens in the next 50 years depends on the degree to which we can reconnect with some of the ancestral wisdom that is available to us. For example, Ella Baker, who used to say we need group-centered leaders rather than leader-centered groups. I think that's such a critical insight. Let me say it one more time. We need group-centered leaders rather than leader-centered groups. As Dr. Jackson was saying, you know, when we have leader-centered groups, it's too easy to take out the leader, right? And so when people today ask, who's the next, you know, Dr. King or Malcolm X or whatever, it's like, well, that's actually the same question the FBI and the CIA are asking, which is exactly why we need to actually learn from history, right? Learn those lessons, move away from the HNIC model, right, of just having one head Negro in charge, which is, you know, as was mentioned, usually a male figure, and honor the group, right? Honor the men, honor the women, honor non-binary folks, honor children, honor elders, because we all have a role to play, right? And it's when we understand that, the power that we have as a collective, right? That's, I think, what's going to make the difference between being 50 years from now and having some level of social transformation versus being in a situation 50 years from now with maybe a few more Black faces in high places.
Yeah. Dr. Shelley, what is your thought here? And I'm going to give you the closing thought here as we
I've got a couple thoughts here.
Well, please give us.
Well, number one, I agree with what everyone has said, but I think we're going to have some archival power here. And I think that's with the descendant communities. And I'm saying the descendants. So we're all talking about the same narrative, trying to bring it, control it, own it. And I think with the descendant community rising, it's going to bring that power, because they're creating this, they're telling the stories, they're creating the databases and so forth, but they're doing it from their house to their community to the public. And so the last part, I think, that maybe say in 2076, it's not about a protest, but it's more about authorship. And we've got two authors. Well, I'm an author also, and got another book coming out. But just thinking of what's happening and coming back to the base of telling the stories, I think who defines American identity in 150 from now is going to be the descendants, taking control and putting those stories out. So again, and that's a turn for this country, for descendants of enslaved whoever, to start telling their stories and being at the table. And I think that change is even going to get stronger. So that's my parting words, is to energize and motivate individuals, the descendants of these different communities that we all have part of, to start talking about and sharing that information.
I love that. It comes right back to our first quote. We
Yes.
must give our own story to the
Yeah.
world, right? We must do it. And I think we have to think about how we are using our philanthropy, our time, talent, treasure, ties, and testimony to give our stories power. Each and every one of you, I gotta thank you so much. This time flew. It went so fast. I want to thank you for not only bringing your stories, bringing your, everyone's an author here, bringing your book. We're going to feature your books in our website. We're going to feature your books in our store. But also, Dr. Shelley, thank you so much for empowering us to be part of this history and saying that individually, we all have a role here. Thank you, Dr. Kellie, for your historical lens on resilience, and not just resilience, but how we can all come together. Thank you, Dr. Brian, for not only bringing forth genius, but also helping us see the genius within each and one of us. And
thank you so much. Can I just real quick, Bathia, say for people in the Boston area, I'm doing a book event tomorrow night at Just Bookish Bookstore, 1463 Dorchester Avenue at 6:30. So if anybody wants to hear more about my book or my work, would love to see you tomorrow night at 6:30 at Just Bookish.
See, this is what we got to do. We got to promote our own selves, right?
Absolutely.
And we have to then amplify what we're doing. And Reverend Dr. M, you preached a sermon for us.
Yes.
Thank you. All we needed to do was pass the plate. But really bringing that sense of faith to us, and faith in ourselves, and faith that God can use within us to move us forward and to where we need to be in the next 50 years. As we close this month on Black History, I don't think I could have done it with a greater set of friends. I don't think of truth tellers, of people who really bring back the words of our father of Black history, Carter G. History shows those who have not learned to do for themselves and have to depend solely on others never obtain any more rights and privileges. But what we learned today, we are poised for privilege. We are poised to bring forth our rights. We are poised for that next 50 years. We're gonna toast ourselves, right? Because we are poised for this moment. We have our books, we have our voice, we have our history. And so thank you so much for inviting us to move from reflection to not just community responsibility, but actually personal responsibility. Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'm going to say, if this dialogue stirred something in you, I hope that you don't let this episode fade. I hope that you stand here, you listen to this, or you're seated, and you know that we're here because someone invested in us, even when it was costly, when it was dangerous, when there was little to give. Someone believed that we were worth studying, worth building, and worth protecting. Now it's our turn. We invite you to lead your philanthropy through what we call the oculi of the 5 T's. Offer your talent to our institutions and govern with wisdom. Commit your time to our work that sustains our communities. Use your testimony to uncover truth and move in rooms and reshape policy. Leverage your ties, that social capital, to open doors wider than they've ever been before. And then invest your treasure so that the next generation inherits the infrastructure and not instability. We are all highly resourced. We stand on other shoulders. When we refuse to build, we let other build on top of us. So let us build together. Let us fund boldly. Let us lead because we know others are coming behind us. And I hope you'll join us next month. I hope you subscribe to us and bring somebody with you. This is Black Tea, where reflection becomes intention and intention becomes legacy. Thank you for joining us.